there, welcome back to another review, this time of the 1949 film Mighty Joe Young. Now, Mighty Joe Young is a kind of a sequel, well, not really. It's what it is. It's more of a sequel to the original King Kong for me in spirit than Son of Kong was. It's directed by the same director, Ernest B. Schoedsack. I don't know if I'm saying his last name correctly. It could be Schoedsack. Once again, he does a competent job here with the directing. Actually, it's really solid here, especially with all the different effects shots and things like that in the film. He also gets a lot out of the film's setting, especially the Gold Safari Club, which is where a lot of this film takes place, is in this modified nightclub that has lions behind glass, and Mighty Joe Young is one of its main attractions. Now, the film also features a screenplay by Ruth Rose, who wrote the script for Son of Kong. This is a much stronger effort than Son of Kong, but it does have some of the same problems as Son of Kong does, especially the climax. And I'll get into why I feel that way soon enough. It has a story by Marion C. Cooper. It has music by Roy Webb, a cinematography by J. Roy Hunt. It's edited by Ted Chessman, who also didn't direct. He edited Son of Kong and I believe the original King Kong. It was also released by RKO. It was actually a box office flop when it came out. It had a budget of $1,800,000, which is a big chunk of money back then in 1949, and it actually ended up losing over $600,000 in the box office, which killed any chance at a sequel. Like, they were thinking maybe we do a sequel, but where Joe might meet Tarzan, but that never really happened because of the film's disappointing box office. Now, the movie also ended up winning an Academy Award for special effects. It was honored with an Academy Award for special effects, a category that did not exist in 1933 for the original King Kong. The film stars Terry Moore as Jill Young, Ben Johnson as Greg, Robert Armstrong as Max O'Hara. Oh, it's the same actor! Wow! You know what? That is really impressive to me. I could not believe it was the same guy. It was the same actor who played Carl Denham in King Kong. And in Son of Kong, he played Max O'Hara in this. Wow. That really shows that he's a very versatile actor. I couldn't even believe it was the same guy. Frank McHugh plays Windy. Douglas Fowley plays Jones. Denis Green plays Crawford. Primo Carnera plays himself. William Shallert plays a gas station attendant. It's an uncredited role. Paul Gilfoyle has a role as Smith. Now, Paul Gilfoyle, I think he was related. There's another actor who has the last name Gilfoyle, who I thought he might have been the same guy, but no, it's a different actor. And there's also a few other people as well, but the main actors are Terry Moore as Jill Young, Ben Johnson as Greg, and Robert Armstrong as Max O'Hara. Now, Willis O'Brien, who created the animation for King Kong, he was the supervisor for those film's stop-motion special effects. Now, Mighty Joe Young has some spectacular stop-motion effects. Some of the best I have ever seen. I mean, it is really impressive. It's amazing how lifelike Mighty Joe Young's movements are in this film. Now, Ray Harryhausen also worked on it as well. He was hired in 1947 on his first film assignment as an assistant animator to O'Brien. O'Brien, however, ended up concentrating on solving various technical problems of the production, delegating most of the actual animation to Harryhausen. Pete Peterson and Marcel Delgado also animated a few sequences for the film. The models of Mighty Joe Young, constructed by Kong's builder Marcel Delgado, in animation are more sophisticated than King Kong. And you can definitely tell. It's a pretty stark difference. While the animation in King Kong is so impressive for the time, this is even more impressive for its time period. Much like King Kong is one of the better films of its type from its era, this is definitely one of its better films of this particular genre from this particular era of the 1940s. Now, at least from what I have personally seen. So this model contained more subtle gestures and even some comedic elements, such as the chase scene where Joe is riding the back of a speeding truck and he spits at his pursuers. Despite this increased technical sophistication, this film, like Kong, features some serious scale issues, with Joe noticeably changing size between many shots. The title character is not supposed to be as large as Kong, perhaps 10 to 12 feet tall. Harryhausen attributed these lapses to producer Cooper, who insisted Joe appear larger in some scenes for dramatic effect. I didn't really notice. These changes in size. It didn't really register for me. Maybe it's because I was just so impressed with the stop motion effects. They were so enthralling that the changes in size never really bothered me that much. Now, the movie opens up in 1937 in Africa, where you have a young Jill Young, played by Laura Lee Michelle, and this little girl actress this comes across as a scene that feels like it's from a completely different movie to me. It feels like it comes across as like a sequence from a outtake from a Shirley Temple film. And it's one of those things that's like, I don't hate it or anything. It just feels kind of really strange within context with the rest of the film. So she's living with her father on his ranch in Africa. Two Africans come by with a baby gorilla. She wants a pet, so she trades some of her toys and jewelry and a flashlight for the gorilla. And she hides it from her dad, and her dad lets her... Her dad is basically... You're given this impression that he's like, no, we're not keeping the gorilla because he'll grow up and be huge and strong and dangerous. But apparently they do. One thing I did like about this scene is that it was a real baby gorilla. Because you normally don't see baby gorillas that much on film, so that was nice to see. But the film definitely becomes more interesting and a lot better to me once you get to the 12 years later part, which is where the majority of the film takes place. 12 years later, Max O'Hara, played by Robert Armstrong, who to me reminded me a lot of Dabney Coleman. I could totally see Dabney Coleman in this type of role. And he also reminded me a little bit of J. Jonah Jameson. And I'm just imagining how perfect Robert Armstrong would have been as J. Jonah Jameson in the Spider-Man film, and then also how perfect Dabney Coleman would have been as J. Jonah Jameson. If they did a Spider-Man film in the 80s, I definitely would have casted J. Jonah Jameson with the actor Dabney Coleman. So I really enjoyed Robert Armstrong in this. He's one of the... He's definitely my favorite character out of this film. At least my favorite human character is Robert Armstrong's character, Max O'Hara. He's this kind of he's not. Well, I wouldn't know if I'd say shrewd businessman is the right word. Well, he kind of is, but he also has a nice heart to him, so he's not a total asshole, which is nice. So he has a sidekick named Greg, played by Ben Johnson, and they're on a trip to Africa looking for animals to headline in O'Hara's new Hollywood nightclub called the Golden Club Safari. The two men have captured several lions. They're about to leave Africa when Mighty Joe Young appears, who is the grown-up baby gorilla from earlier. He's now 12 feet tall. He weighs 2,000 pounds. A caged lion bites his finger. He goes on a rampage. This is a great scene. It's rollicking. It's fun. The stop-motion animation is really well done here. It's a fast-paced, fun sequence. Of course, Max O'Hara is visualizing Joe as the big attraction for his nightclub. So he has Max and Greg try to rope him. So you have these cowboys on horseback trying to rope up Mighty Joe Young, and eventually, they're just not very successful because Joe is just ripping these ropes off like they're nothing, and they're not able to do anything. He throws both men from their horses. He breaks free of their ropes, and his rampage is not stopped until a grown-up Jill Young, played by Terry Moore, arrives, calming Joe down. She's furious with both men and then storms off with Joe. Now, I like Terry Moore here. She was likable. She didn't really have a lot of... I don't know, she didn't leave as much of an impact on me as Fay Wray did, but she was still competent and solid enough in her role. And it was really an interesting dynamic to see a girl in a film like this, in a role where she's not the damsel in distress. It's a pretty strong role for a strong female role, And also, she's friends with this giant ape, and she's also, in a way, its mother. So it's one of those things where the dynamic's very interesting, and it's a complete opposite of the dynamic between Fay Ray's Anne and King Kong. The dynamic between Joe and Jill is completely different. It's definitely more benevolent. And the film does a great job making Joe a very likable character. It really makes you sympathize with this beast. So, both later meet with Jill. Greg becomes hopelessly smitten with her. I didn't buy the romance between the two. I didn't really buy the romance between Fay Ray, between Anne and Jack either. So, Jill calms down. She hears about Max's nightclub proposal. Greg tries to dissuade her, but Max tells her that she and Joe will be a huge Hollywood hit, and they will be rich within weeks. She needs the income to save her ranch so she decides she must take Joe to Hollywood. So then you get the opening night sequence where Joe makes his first on-stage appearance. And this is a huge, giant spectacle. The effects in this are top-notch. Honestly, pretty jaw-dropping even today. He lifts a large platform with a piano above his head while Jill plays it. And she plays this tune that you might find familiar. It goes like this. It's da 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 da. Da 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 da. So if that sounds familiar to you, and it should, especially if you've seen Batman, Tim Burton's Batman, because that was used in a pretty famous sequence with the Joker and Vicky Vale, where after he shoots a Bruce Wayne. He has this little speech that he gives, this little sort of poem, like twisted poem he gives to Vicky Vale, and he does it to the tune of this song. So when I heard that, I was like, oh, cool. Like, it's nice to hear that in another film. Of course, this predated Batman by many years, but I remember that from Batman in that sequence with the Joker with Jack Nicholson. Now, there you have that really cool scene with the piano. Then there's a fun scene where Joe has a tug-of-war with the 10 strongest men in the world, which he easily wins. Heavyweight boxer Primo Carnera tries to box with Joe, but Joe just tosses him like a rag doll into the audience. Joe's popularity grows, and by the 10th week, he is Hollywood's biggest attraction. But Joe and Jill are starting to miss their African home. Jill tells Max and Greg that she's having second thoughts. Joe is looking really sad in his cell. He's all in his cage. He's sad. He wants to go home. Greg tries to convince Max to let them go home, but thinking only about more profit, he's able to forestall her leaving by sweet talking her. By the 17th week, Joe is miserable. He has grown tired of performing and is homesick. And he's also treated like a clown. And these sequences are really get me emotionally. The writer Ruth Rose did a really phenomenal job here, making me connect with Joe with this scene, because it's just so sad and tragic, and it's messed up. Here's Joe. He's an organ grinder's monkey with a hat on. Jill is winding up the box, and they're throwing these. And the whole thing is everyone in the audience, everyone who's sitting there in the club, has these giant pieces of money, and they're probably cardboard or something. I don't know. They could be metal, and they're asked to fling them at Joe, and whichever one Joe picks up. And there's numbers on them, so whichever one Joe picks up, that table gets free champagne. And so this whole crowded nightclub is just throwing these fake money, these pieces of heavy fake money at Joe, and he's understandably upset. And it really is animal abuse. They're hitting him with these pieces of fake money, and then you think that's bad enough, but then here comes the douchebag patrol. I like to call these guys the douchebag patrol. This is precisely what they are. There's this table of 3 drunks, and this one guy, he grabs a bottle and he throws it at Joe, and he hits him right in the head. And of course, Joe becomes angry, he roars at the crowd. Jill shouts for the audience to stop, and then the curtains come down, and I'm just like, I'm sitting there seething because I'm like, I hate it when I see animals abused in real life and also in movies. I mean, animal abuse is animal abuse. Doesn't matter if it's stop motion 12-foot ape. It's still animal abuse. It still pisses me off, and it was just so effective. It was such an effective sequence. That's the moment where I was really totally 100% on Joe's side, and I wanted to see him go home because he doesn't belong here. He needs to go home back to Africa where assholes aren't going to throw shit at him. And if you think it's not going to get any worse than that, it does though, because Greg and Jill express their feelings for one another. Greg agrees to return with her to Africa to bring Joe with them, but this is where things turn from bad to worse, because Joe's upset and he's sullen. He's in his cell. He's in his cage. The douchebag patrol shows up again and have snuck in bottles of booze, and they start handing him the booze, and they get Joe drunk. And of course, one of the douchebag patrol members, the guy who threw the bottle at Joe, he's all pissed at Joe now because he drank all of his booze. Oh, you leave any for us. And then he burns him with a lighter. Because now he's drunk and now he's pissed off, and he breaks out of the cell. He smashes through a nearby wall, and he wrecks the nightclub's interior in an absolutely just stunning sequence, because the stop motion effects are just so well done in this scene. Just wrecks the place. He smashes the glass of the lion habitat, allows the lions to escape into the crowded nightclub. Joe kills several of the lions, even saves one of the douchebag patrol from being eaten by one of the lions. And I'm like, no, let him eat him. Let him eat it. That guy deserves it. He's the cause of all of this. That's definitely one problem I had with this movie, is the douchebag patrol, they get no comeuppance. They don't get anything. They're the ones that caused all of this. They're the ones that caused Joe to escape and cause all this property damage and carnage. They're the ones that did it. And they get off scot-free. Nothing happens to these guys. So, Jill and Greg return to find the nightclub in shambles. Jill manages to get Joe back to his cage, and the police show up and they shoot the remaining lions. The lions didn't deserve to be shot either. All this is because of the douchebag patrol. So the court decree orders that Joe be destroyed, be shot. It's a court order. Jill's pleas to save him and send him back to Africa are denied. I don't know why, because it's not his fault. It's the douchebag patrol's fault. But okay. Greg and O'Hara and Jill devise a plan to get Joe out of California by using a moving van and then a cargo ship. When Joe's executioners arrive to put him down, they find his cage empty and themselves locked inside the nightclub. As the van is leaving, Joe is spotted by an itinerant worker who later informs the authorities. On the way to the ship, police spot the moving van. They give chase. Joe has been cleverly transferred to a covered truck, and the moving van, driven by Max, is just a decoy. The police stop the van. They arrest Max. Driven by Greg and carrying Joel and Jill, the truck gets stuck in heavy mud. Joe gets out of the truck and pushes the truck out of the mud. Brrr. Excuse me. There's just so many words. The police then get stuck in the mud as the truck drives away. Before they're able to reach the port and the cargo ship, then they come upon a random burning orphanage that's engulfed in flames. Now, admittedly, the effects in this sequence are impressive. But this is where the script kind of goes off the rails for me. This is another instance where it just like Son of Kong, it felt like the writer, Ruth Rose, was like, I need a big climax. What? We need a big climax. they come across an orphanage that's on fire. And I'm just like, that has nothing to do with the rest of the movie. That has nothing to do with the story. It has nothing to do with the pacing that you're building up. In fact, all it does is ruin the pacing you're building up. And for me personally, it's not a good climax. Because the whole climax is built on getting Joe back to Africa. And then it just stops randomly in this really long scene where you have Jill and Greg trying to save these kids out of this orphanage that's on fire, and then Joe trying to save some more kids out of the fire. And it's an impressive sequence in terms of effects, but I'm not that emotionally invested in it because it just feels like, oh, the whole stuff with getting the chase to get Joe back home wasn't enough. And I personally felt it was more than enough because it was going by at a good pace. And I think if they just added one more car chase, or maybe they're going through the city and the truck kind of gets stopped and not Kong. I keep trying to say Kong because it's very similar to King Kong. And Joe gets out, and if I said Kong earlier, my bad. Joe gets out and he's going through a little mini rampage, maybe a little bit of a romp through the city, and then he gets put back into the truck, and they manage to get him on the boat just in time to get him back to Africa. I think that would be better than this orphanage climax, which just seems tacked on to me. It doesn't feel like it fits with the rest of the plot. It's just a random occurrence. So they save all the kids except for one, because there's a girl who's trapped at the top of the building, and Joe ends up saving her. And they do this like cop-out stuff where it looks like Joe saved the kid, but then the kid runs away, crawls away, and Joe has to save her again before the rest of the building falls to the ground. And I guess because of his heroism, because of Joe's heroic efforts, the court order to shoot him is thrown out, and that's it. And I was just like, just wasn't really. I didn't. The effect was impressive. I just didn't feel it was necessary. The whole scene with the orphanage. Then later, months later, Max receives some home movies from his friends, Jill and Greg and Jung and Jung. What the fuck? And Joe. Jung. And Mighty Joe Young. Combining Joe and Young, damn it. And Joe. And Joe waves goodbye to the audience, and they play the da 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 da. And then that's the end of the movie. And I'm glad the movie had a happy ending, because at first I was worried that it was going to be one of those like, oh no, Joe is going to die saving the girl, and then I'm like, don't go there. It didn't go there, thankfully. But I can't lie and say the orphanage climax just, it didn't really work for me. And there's some other things, like for specifically the character of Greg, which is very weak. The actor wasn't that great either. It was like a poor man's John Wayne, Ben Johnson. And, but, you know, it's still a fun movie. It goes by at a good enough pace. The characters are likable enough. Joe is a really wonderful creation. He definitely is mighty. He's definitely worthy of that moniker. And, like I said earlier, some really spectacular stop motion effects. So, I really don't know what else to say about the film, except if I was to rate out of 5 stars. I would probably give Mighty Joe Young, I would give the film, because the problems I have with it are just little minor nitpicks. Because overall, I really liked the film. I just thought the climax could have been a bit better. I don't really like the character of Greg. And there's a few other things that, you know, the douchebag patrol doesn't get their comeuppance, which upsets me. But other than that, it's a really solid film. So I would give it 4 out of 5 stars. Definitely one of the best films of its type that I've seen from this era. And I really don't know what else to say, except thank you for watching. And as always, I will see you guys later. See ya.